It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your feel-good breakfast show. How are you feeling, G?
I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. I'm glad I gave you the humorous moment that you all needed.
Beautiful.
Now, it's been an awesome show, and I think this whole week there has been a certain gravitas, and today really does come with that. This is an opportunity for all of us to cast a light on something that's difficult to talk about, but something that is vitally important that we do. World Suicide Prevention Day, an awareness day observed on the 10th of September every year. This day was created in order to provide worldwide commitment and action. I love that, action to prevent suicides before it is too late. Suicide is a global phenomenon that we do, yes, experience here in South Africa, but close to 1 million people commit suicide each year. For family and friends affected by suicide or even attempted suicide, the emotional impact can last, well, I don't think you ever recover, truly. And here to talk us through suicide prevention, please welcome our trusted multimedia health specialist and good mate, Dr. Darren Green.
Good morning.
Buddy, good to have you here.
Thank you, thanks.
Dr. Darren Green, I want to find out from you. It's a very somber topic, but I'm also glad that we're talking about it because maybe, just maybe, there is somebody that we can help today.
Right now.
What are the leading causes of suicide in our country specifically?
Yeah, if we look at the statistics via the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, the biggest causes are people that are suffering from mental health issues like depression and anxiety, even performance anxiety in the workplace, at school, even affecting teenagers for teen suicide, for example. Massive changes in your life. You know, they always speak about the big three. Change your job, change your partner, obviously, and the other thing is obviously changing your location where you live. Those are massive psychological stresses on one, and sometimes we have a triple whammy of those. Many people actually do as well. That aside, obviously, the genetic risk factors of having mental illness and depression, which is actually genetic with no specific environmental factors involved.
Sometimes just needs a trigger, even if that,
Correct. So those are some big ones, you know, those massive changes and obviously the understanding a bit of the brain biology behind it.
I'm going to reiterate this number, 0800 567 567. That is the number for the suicide helpline for the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. They are amazing. They've got counsellors that can speak to you right now if you need to talk to someone. So if any red flags are raised today, please give that number a call. Maybe a good place for us to kind of gain perspective of how prevalent it is to look at some of those statistics. What are South Africa's statistics like? Do you have an idea?
Yes. So, I mean, we mentioned close to 1 million a year. Also understanding the fundamental differences between male and female suicides. Teenage suicide, for example, accounts for 10% of teenage deaths in our country. Also understanding, too, that one person commits suicide per hour. If you think of it in that way.
1 person per hour.
If you think of it that way, it kind of really hits home. And interesting to note, the incidence of suicide amongst males particularly is considerably higher, sometimes even between 14 and 18 a day.
Why
in our country.
In our country. Why do you think that is? I know it's an emotional
question. I mean, no, for sure. A lot of it has got to do with culture. Our cultures in our communities are pretty much geared on men being very, very quiet about their feelings, about their stresses. They consider it weakness to show vulnerability in terms of psychological stress. And that stigma is something that exists from a deep-seated cultural belief system. And you can't change the behavior unless you change the belief system. Viktor Frankl put it quite nicely by saying that the two most important days in your life, or Mark Twain rather, sorry. Viktor Frankl commented on this quote. Mark Twain, the day you're born, and the day
you find out why.
And a lot of people have lost that why. They don't know what their purpose is. And that hopelessness then sinks in, and then it's triggered by all the other stresses that we've mentioned already, leaving them in a place where they then have behavior that isolates. And that's where we need to obviously see the warning signs and get on board and obviously do something actively about it, like you said.
Exactly. Well, coming up after this, I want to speak to you about the methods that people use and, of course, what are the warning signs that we have to look out for when it comes to this. It is World Suicide Prevention Day, a day that is observed on the 10th of September every year. And we're looking for maybe signs of the people around us. We live such busy lives. We live past one another. And it can be a simple thing of seeing that someone is going through something and maybe stopping for just a minute and asking some critical questions in order to save someone from something that they'll do, of course, that we don't want them to do. So this talk will continue with Dr. Darren Green after this.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're live with Expresso. Thank you so much for tuning in and rejoining a very important conversation, not just because today is World Suicide Prevention Day, but every day we need to be talking about this and hopefully offering a platform for people who are at most risk of feeling like suicide might be an actual option for them to take action in their own lives, or we as family members, friends, can take action in that space. We've got Dr. Darren Green here to answer your questions, and we've got the details of the South African Depression and Anxiety Group on screen on our social media platforms. You can even SMS them and they'll phone you back, but please reach out to someone.
Yeah. You know, Dr. Darren, the first thing that you always hear people say, and I've heard it from so many of my friends who have lost friends and family as a result of death by suicide, is what were they trying to tell me, or what were the signs that I didn't see? You always go back to it as like, what did I not see? Maybe that's what we should be talking about today. What are some of the things that we need to look out for when it comes to suicide?
So up to 75% of people do show signs that you can pick up on if we take the time to look, to listen, and obviously to be available. And I think being present when someone's busy talking to you is the first thing. Because while we're talking to people, often they're busy drifting off and already thinking of the next thing, as you know, so really being observant. So what are the things you can notice? I think firstly, there's some behavioral patterns that change. People's energy levels might have a considerable change in terms of wanting to show initiative, join projects, join group sessions of doing things like a hike, socializing.
Becoming passive.
So, passive. Isolating yourself is one thing. Secondly, their behavior around things like eating and food might change. Where because of them being in such a dark, lonely place, they don't even have appetite, because that energy requires you actually making an effort to pack a lunch, to actually prioritize that. Self-care is something that can go down as well. They just don't look after themselves in terms of how they look. Their self-care in terms of brushing your hair, looking after yourself, dressing appropriately, hygiene issues can also... so those are massive. And then, of course, obviously, the mood in terms of being really dark. The conversations that I had are often very somber, very sad. You can see people exclude themselves and actually get irritated when someone's too happy. Seriously, it irritates them when someone's laughing or cracking jokes. And then what happens is you'll often find them then obviously isolating themselves even more. With that sleep disturbance, because of depression and anxiety, both having quite a significant effect on sleep, you can either sleep too much, where you have no willpower to get out of bed and lay in bed the entire day, for example, feeling weaker and weaker, or you could obviously stay awake in a hyper-alert state where you then have insomnia, in which case the dire effects on your physiology affect your immunity, your energy
further
levels.
exacerbate.
Exactly. So there are quite a few.
We've spoken about the relationship to mental health issues, and obviously in that case, then there are options. We've spoken so much about that during Mental Health Awareness Month, about seeking professional help, that there are pharmaceuticals, ways that you can approach that. But just picking up on something that you said, you talk about that, the survivor's guilt. I might be using the term in completely the wrong way, but is someone who has experienced suicide close to the family, within their family, a close friend, are they at an increased risk of they themselves following that same course?
So often the family members could be suffering from the same mental illness, biological shortage, for example, of a neurotransmitter in the brain, predisposing them to mental illness or depression. Witnessing suicide and that triggering ideas, oh, maybe I can do that as an exit for my situation, is what we refer to as the suicide contagion. Like a virus that spreads. In terms of thinking that's in any way a realistic exit to my problem, which obviously it isn't.
Is that more prevalent in young people?
Younger people under the age of 30, so between 15 and 30, obviously, people will then witness the conversations or witness, obviously, famous people and role models having done that, thinking it's a realistic option, way out.
Yeah.
The youngest suicide in South Africa is 6 years old.
What?
So you tell me, how does someone at the age of 6 see absolutely no hope and reason to live? It must be a really, really dark place. And we often refer to the analogy of people wearing sunglasses in terms of depression and mental health, where you can only see the darkness through the sunglasses that are tinted. And what we have to do, obviously, is help you realize that it's a temporary thing. It's not a permanent thing. And you can, obviously, overcome the mental health, the depression, etc., and lift those sunglasses and actually start seeing the light again.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about Suicide Prevention Day, and the question that I want to ask after this is, if someone attempts to commit suicide once, is there a chance that they might try it again?
Yep. So
we'll talk about that
absolutely,
when we return after this.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Of course, that could be if you are someone who is feeling many of the thoughts that we've discussed today. A very difficult thing to broach with your family, with anyone, is to talk about these feelings, and we certainly urge that you do. The South African Depression and Anxiety Group have their helpline open. We've got the number on screen right now, 0800 567 567. If you can't talk to a family member or someone close to you, speak to them. They've got counsellors on standby 24/7. You have to speak to someone. Just start that conversation. But we are continuing now talking about suicide prevention. It's all about taking action today.
Dr. Darren, I wanted to find out, if someone attempts suicide but fails, is there a chance that they could try again, or is that going to be a wake-up call?
Enough of a shock.
Yeah, it often is a cry for help.
Yeah.
The definitions, obviously, of what you're referring to is called parasuicide, where in parallel to dying by suicide, where, for example, someone, as a desperate plea, would try to half end their life. So obviously that comes into play lots of times in the emergency rooms when you see someone coming from an overdose, for example, repeatedly, and the poor family then become numbed to those attempts.
Oh, wow.
It affects the family and the community in such an adverse way, because the first time is obviously this massive dramatic shock, and when it happens again and again, due to the underlying issue not being addressed, or the mental illness not being treated efficiently, it can then represent. But the effects on the family and the community are quite dire in that sense. But, people tend to say, but you're crying wolf, until it becomes so close to home, when it's one of your own family members, brothers, sisters, or parents.
And one can certainly empathize with both sides of that coin. I keep going back to putting myself in that position if someone close to me does come, or even we have strangers. I think maybe there's a level of anonymity in the job that we have, but people often declare pretty deep and dark things to us because it's safer than going to their family, to going to someone that they know. But specifically for someone who would be expected to action on what they are hearing, what do I say? What if someone, a family member or someone close to me, reveals that they are in a suicidal space? What tone do I use and what words
Great
do I
question,
use?
great. So we call it suicidal ideation, when they're even thinking of it as an option. And in that time, you might make contact with someone that opens up to you or talks to you. And what happens is, the first thing is, don't judge what they say. Don't say, oh, but that's, there's just snap out of it. There's just so much good about you. Remember, the problem in that emotional state right there is they don't have the ability to see an exit plan other than something, as dismal as this. They also don't have the ability to see any good in a situation. So, looking at good, it's black or white. There's no grey for someone that's extremely depressed and suffering from depression.
By highlighting the good, you're only reinforcing
Exactly.
the
So
negative,
firstly is, don't assume that they will get to someone else. If they are serious and they've actually volunteered information, don't leave it. Actually accompany them and take them and say to them, I'm going to take you to someone right now because you're feeling where you're at. And there is something we can do about it. Don't just assume someone else can do it. Don't say, call me if you need help. That's often what happens. If you're concerned, a teacher, for example, that watches someone in the classroom should pick up the phone and phone the parents and say, I've noticed this, I am concerned. Can you do something about it, or must I do something about it at school? And that applies to us in this
So
situation.
it's almost
as
less
well.
about what you can say because you're not a psychologist, you're not a therapist,
Correct.
and you cannot say the magical words that'll save them in that situation.
So what you do.
Action,
Absolutely.
action. Okay.
What if somebody is watching right now and they are contemplating suicide?
Yes.
And the question that I have is, how do they overcome those suicidal thoughts? What processes can they put in place? How can you help get yourself out of that dark place if you realize this is something that I'm constantly thinking about all of a sudden?
Absolutely. You remember I referred to last week a thought, not defining completely who you are.
I've thought about that.
Yes, how a thought can come into your head, and what we need to realize that the thoughts coming into our minds and heads, even if they're negative thoughts, for example, they are not forever. They are temporary in nature, and we have the ability to actually choose whether we agree with the thought, believe the thought, or not. And what we'll do when we get you, obviously, to be heard by someone, when you start sharing those thoughts, someone will then take you through a counseling process and a guided process, hold your hand through it to actually reiterate and show you that those thoughts don't define you.
Completely, and ultimately, at the end of the day, ask yourself the question, who is thinking that thought?
Yes.
There is a greater being, whether you are spiritual or not, there is a greater being thinking that thought. That thought is in your mind, and there are people who know the mechanics of your brain who can take you through a process to rewire it. It's not about them getting you to believe anything or to see the brighter side of life. It's not about that. They know they have the tools to be able to help you. They have learned those tools and they have proven those tools. So there is help in that sense, but it does require you to just speak out.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It's Expresso right here on SABC3. We are talking about World Suicide Prevention Day. And just to share that number with you again for the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, you can call the Suicide Helpline on 0800 567 567 if you do find that you need help. But we're going to go to our social media comments.
Yeah,
just
a couple of people weighing in. Thank you
chat
so
more
much
about
for being a part of the conversation. Shireen obviously wishing us all a good morning. Morning, Shireen.
Hi, Shireen.
I know some people who suffer from bipolar disorder and are depressed. They have said on many occasions that they want to end their lives. I've managed to speak to someone very close and to always tell me if they're not okay, and it helps a lot. And they're also on medication. Again, weighing in that if you witness a change in someone, if someone does speak to you, you know, action it in some way, speak to their family, speak to a therapist. As you've said, it's not easy for them, but with love and support and professional help, it can help. And then Rochelle, so thanks, Shireen. And then Rochelle coming in saying, a lack of support to the families is crucial, because once a suicide takes place in our disadvantaged areas, parents or family shun one another. I feel it's so unfair. In schools, bullying is a major taboo subject, yet suicides happen due to this in schools. Schools should bring this up in life orientation classes. Wow, so sad.
Yeah, very big goal for the Department of Education. They're implementing in terms of life orientation skills at the moment, in view of the high teenage suicide rate.
Is it more prevalent in disadvantaged communities?
There is lower, middle to lower socioeconomic, because of this, the stress in those communities in terms of competition to survive, in terms of things like resources, as well as obviously things like crime. You can imagine the psychological stress of living in fear. Feeling safe is at the core of so many of our mental health illnesses. So safety is a big thing when it comes to mental health.
Can I just ask this, bolting onto the consciousness of the country right now, how prevalent, when you look at the causes of suicide, is abuse at the core of what's driving suicide?
Yeah, so there are two sides to that. The one thing is that people go through a process where they develop, for example, what we refer to as the battered wife syndrome, where they start having a belief system that they aren't worthy of anything greater and more than that, where they don't realize that the thoughts that are being imposed upon them by someone else's actions actually is a lie, and that they are worth more than that. So they struggle to break the belief system that I'm not worth anything, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. So they struggle to break that thought process, and therefore they don't do anything to change the pattern of behavior that they're subjected to. When it comes, obviously, to changing that, you need to start with the belief system to get the action to be changed.
I want to know, is there a link between mental health and suicide?
Yeah, so mental health refers obviously to your stability in terms of your mood going above the line and below the line. It's normal for us to have happy days sometimes and a little bit of a shadier day on other times. The problem comes in when your time below the line becomes significant enough that it starts affecting your decision making, your relationships at work, school, at home, etc. And then those periods become prolonged, leading then to a change of behavior over time and that negative ideation that we're discussing.
Sure.
One last piece of advice to leave. I know it's such a broad topic and we've spoken about a lot, so thank you so much for sharing your perspective. What would you like to round off with?
I think if high impact message would be treat someone that shows you a sign that they might be not coping and considering obviously a lack of self-worth in their lives. Treat them like you would one of your closest family members. Ask, what would I have liked if I was in that position? And it might change significantly your perception of what you need to do. And don't assume someone else is going to do it. Because then you live with the guilt of having known and seen these symptoms and not actioning them, like you've said. So let's use the wonderful resources we have in our country and modify and change behavior from belief systems. And the young people out there, just find one person to talk to.
Yeah.
One person.
Even if it's not someone close to you, speak to someone who can direct you in the right way. Just take that one tiny, tiny first step. It's not a massive thing, just one step. Speak to someone. The number to call right now, 0800 567 567. There is someone standing by 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to speak to you.